Hello guys, good afternoon, good to see you all. Hello. Welcome to class number 5 of Semana Britânica. Nossa aula é do Lunchtime Listening. We're having a Lunchtime Listening class, a special one this week because of Semana Britânica. Hello everybody who's arriving. Hello. It's great to see you. Hi from Madrid. Very nice. Good to see you from Portugal. I'll be there soon too. Great to see you all. So today is our 5th class in Semana Britânica. This week I have given class on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and today is the 5th class. As always on Fridays, I give a class 100% in English. The classes on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there was a mix of Portuguese and English, but today we are going to be using just English to practice your listening skills. This class is for you to listen and try and understand what I am explaining to you. And this class will be about Elton John. Elton John is a very famous British singer. Yesterday we studied his songs here on Instagram, and today we are going to be studying his life. We're going to be looking at where Elton John was born, what's Elton John's real name, what his life was like, how he is today, etc. Great to see lots of people here. So let's start our class by talking about Elton. Elton's real name is not Elton. So let's remind ourselves who Elton John is. Here we have a young Elton John in the 70s singing at his piano. We know who Elton John is because of his music, but also because of his style. Elton is very famous for having very colourful costumes, using glasses, playing, performing his music. Not just playing his music, not just singing, but performing. And if you've ever seen Elton John live, he is a performer. And Elton John was, from a very young age, very, very interested in music. Interestingly, Elton started playing the piano when he was 3 years old. When most of us are learning to do basic things, Elton was interested in playing the piano at the age of 3. So it just shows how he was a child prodigy. He was exceptionally talented. So Elton's real name is actually Reginald. If you have watched the film about Elton's life, Rocket Man, you will know this. His real name is Reginald. Very different from Elton. So his real name is Reginald Kenneth Dwight. So not quite as catchy. We use the word catchy when we're describing something that we can remember easily. So it's not a very catchy name, is it? Reginald. And so we will see that Elton would change his name from Reginald to Elton later on. But he was born Reginald Kenneth Dwight on the 25th of March. So his birthday is this week. Elton's birthday was on Tuesday. So Elton was born on the 25th of March in 1947. He was born in a small town in the countryside areas of England. So we're talking outside of big cities. He was born in a small town called Pinner in Middlesex. And so I'm going to show you the house that Elton grew up in. Here we have Elton's house. This house was a government's house. A government's house is this idea of you rent it from the government, kind of like social housing, what we call a council house in English. specifically in British English, because the council is the local prefeitura, is the local government. And so this was a local government house, a council house. This is where Elton was a child. This is where he played his piano when he was 3 years old. So this is where Reginald was born. He was an only child with his mum and dad. He was especially close to his mother, Sheila, and he had an estranged relationship with his father, Stanley, and we're going to see why in a bit. So he was born as an only child between his parents. His parents would eventually divorce, and then they would remarry, and his father would have other children. So he has half brothers, we say, when we have siblings from another marriage, from our parents' other marriage. But Elton was an only child between his parents. Let's have a look at Elton with his mum here when they're a bit older. Elton was close to his mother. He talked about her support when he was interested in music. We have to remember that if Elton was born in 1947, he grew up, he was, a teenager in the 60s. And this was a time when it was not encouraged in many families to be somebody artistic. His father, Elton's father, was in the Air Force, and he was very much encouraged Elton to follow a traditional career. He didn't want Elton to go into music, but Elton was very passionate about his music. As I said, he started playing the piano when he was 3. By the age of 7, he started piano lessons, and by the age of 11, he got a scholarship. A scholarship is like money, a free place in an academy. So there was the Royal Academy of Music in England, and Elton, because of his talent, was recognised, and he was given a scholarship. And he would use this scholarship to develop his talent. But there was already talent in Elton. Elton was always has always been mentioned as somebody who has a great capability of being able to listen to music and reproduce it. So he could reproduce music on his piano that other artists had created without having to look at the notes, look at the music on the paper. He could just listen and reproduce it. We say when somebody has this ability, we say that they have a good ear. They have a good ear, so they can listen to music and reproduce it very easily. And this is what Elton could do. And he started playing actually at a pub at the age of 15. Can you imagine seeing a young Elton playing the piano at a pub at the age of 15? He would do this on Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday and at night to obviously earn money, but also to practice this performance that he so enjoyed it. Okay, so he started playing at his first performances was when he was 15. His parents would divorce when he was 14 years old. They had always had a tumultuous is a difficult relationship that had lots of ups and downs, lots of difficult moments. They had a tumultuous relationship. His parents, they divorced when Elton was 14. And as I said, he did not have a very close relationship with his father, principally because his father did not really encourage Elton to follow his artistic side, to prefer this idea of a sensible, more stable career. Whilst his mother would eventually remarry and her second husband would be more supportive of Elton's choice of career. So he left school at 17 years old and he followed his passion for music. He would get himself involved in a few bands, and eventually he would create a band called Bluesology. This is important because this is the moment when Elton would eventually create his name, Elton John. When he created this band, Bluesology, with other members, there were 2 other members in this band who were very important. They became his friends. One person's name was Elton Dean, and the other person in the band was called Long John Baldry. So Elton Dean and Long John Baldry. These were the two other members in the band. And so Elton, whose name was Reginald, remember, would eventually rename himself Elton John through the names of these two people who he played in one of his original bands in Bluesology. So Long John Baldry would become the part that was John in Elton John, and Elton Dean, the name Elton, would become the first part of Elton's name. So Elton John, and actually a way of Elton or Reginald recognizing these two people who played a big part in the first band that Elton had in Bluesology. And when we have somebody whose real name is one thing and they have an artistic name, we call this artistic name their stage name. So his birth certificate says Reginald and his stage name is Elton John. Actually, it's Elton Hercules John, but he doesn't use the part of Hercules. So that's why Elton John is called Elton John and not other names. And that's why he chose to rename himself from his name Reginald. Before he renamed himself, he was very much known by people as Reggie. So if you watch the film about Elton's life, you will see people referring to him as Reggie. When he eventually had contact with a music publishing group, he would meet somebody who would change his life forever. And this is the person who we spoke about in yesterday's class about Elton's music. He would meet somebody called Bernie. So let's see this person who would make such a difference to Elton's life. Here we have Elton with Bernie. So Bernie was somebody who was incredibly good with words. He would write music, poetry, most of Elton's very famous songs were written, the words were written by Bernie and the music was written by Elton. So this partnership between Bernie and Elton has lasted throughout Elton's life. He credits Bernie as helping him through some of the darkest times of his life too. And it's one of those partnerships that's actually quite beautiful in music, because a lot of the time, these partnerships do not last long because people perhaps feel like they have conflicting opinions, etc. But actually, Elton and Bernie's partnership has lasted from that time in the 1970s to until now. So the 1960s, his first major success with Bernie was in 1970 with the song Your Song, which we studied yesterday in our class. Do you guys remember Your Song? So Your Song is the song that really brought Elton into the music world. People would recognize him. It would also be his big success in the US. At that time, it was very difficult for British artists to take their music into the American market, because the American market had different audience, and also there were lots of American artists too, very famous ones such as Mr. Presley. So we have lots of people contending for the American market, and Elton with his music would break into the American market with the song Your Song, which is a beautiful song which was written in Elton John's mother's kitchen. So when you think of Elton John and Bernie making this song in Elton John's mother's kitchen, so they were sitting there at the kitchen table and they had this idea for Your Song. It would become a very big hit in 1970. When a song is successful, we say it is a big hit. In 1972, there would be a very famous guitarist, Davy Johnstone, who would join the Elton John band, and that's when he would have his first #1 album with songs such as Rocket Man, which we also studied yesterday. He would then have seven consecutive number ones in the US. So 7 in a row, 7 consecutive number ones. That's a lot of number ones when you're competing with so many other artists. And this would include songs such as Crocodile Rock, and also, as I mentioned, one of my mum's favorite songs, Daniel. He would also have big success following that with the album Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which we also studied yesterday in our class. This would basically consolidate him. This would make him an icon. He became incredibly famous. Elton John, if you have watched the film about Elton John, you can imagine the success, that time of the 70s, that time he was at the peak of his career when people loved Elton John. He also has become incredibly famous, Elton, for his collaborations. Many of his songs are duets. They have people who are singing along with him, playing along with him. So, for example, Don't Go Breaking My Heart with Kiki D, the George Michael collaboration with Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. These are very famous collaborations. When we have a collaboration with two people, we call it a duet. So he had many famous duets too during his career. Something that actually is very iconic about Elton is something I mentioned at the beginning of the live, the way Elton dressed. Elton, a bit like Freddie Mercury, became very singular in the way he dressed. People would look at Elton and know it was Elton John because of the way he chose to dress. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the live, this little boy at the piano when he was younger playing here would eventually develop into this person playing the piano in the 70s. And so we can see here a young Elton becoming this incredible star, wearing these very extravagant costumes and wearing these glasses. Elton has always been very famous for the glasses that he wears. And it was apparently the first glasses that Elton wore were inspired by the American artist Buddy Holly. And so if you know who Buddy Holly is, you know his glasses, you can see where Elton got his inspiration from. And Elton has always been very iconic for the way he dresses. And he has obviously reached huge success after the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. When I was a child, the movie, The Lion King, the Disney version, became very famous. And that was the song, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? I almost forgot the song. Can you feel the love tonight? That song by Elton John was famous when I was a child because of the Lion King movie. And he continued his success in the 90s. Obviously, in 1997, as I mentioned in our class yesterday, he had the unfortunate objective of having to adapt a song that he had written for Marilyn Monroe, to make it a song for his friend, Princess Diana, when she died. So here we have a photo of Elton with Princess Diana. He was very much a friend of Princess Diana. He helped Princess Diana with her bulimia, her eating disorder, which he too had gone through before. And when Princess Diana died, he adapted his song Candle in the Wind and sang it for her at her funeral. And it's one of those very many iconic moments of Elton's life when we remember how beautiful his voice is, how beautiful the lyrics are to this song, and how much it really embodied that moment. I think it was the moment when the world stopped to watch the funeral of this very, very important woman in British history. So here we have Elton John in 1997 singing his new version of Candle in the Wind in remembrance of Diana. And if you haven't studied this song, we have homework from yesterday's class which studies the lyrics of this song. Nowadays, in recent years, Elton has continued to produce music. He recently, in the beginning of March, released a new song. He's constantly producing material, collaborations. He's collaborated with modern day artists such as Dua Lipa, Britney Spears, etc. So Elton is always trying to reinvent himself, reinvent his music, bring something new. And it's difficult to choose your favorite Elton song, I think, because of how many different types of songs he produced. And I think sometimes we have a favorite song because we identify with it and the lyrics at that moment. When we're sad, we listen to Sorry seems to be the hardest word. And then when we're feeling romantic, we listen to Your Song. And then when we're feeling like we want to dance, we listen to Crocodile Rock. And so Elton has songs for almost every moment in our lives, and that makes him incredibly iconic because of it. And I think that's what makes his music universal. There is something for everybody. Elton John's life wasn't all fame, fortune, and happiness. As I mentioned, when he was a child, his parents had a very difficult relationship. He obviously was not born into a rich family. He struggled to find success at the beginning of his career. And eventually, when he became famous, Elton became famous in a time when the music industry had serious problems with supporting the artists and making sure those artists were able to find support around them. There was very much this idea that there was a machine that they had to keep producing music, and it forgot about the mental health of the artist. We see this with many artists such as Freddie Mercury, with Elvis Presley, etc. They suffered a lot when they were at the top of their fame, and Elton was no different. He had huge problems with alcohol, with drugs, specifically cocaine, and also with prescription medication. And as I said, the film Rocketman, which was closely followed by Elton John, so it's got a good version of his life there. It shows how much this affected Elton's creativity, this affected Elton's health, and also this affected his relationships around him. He would be engaged to a woman, Linda, in the 1960s, but he was convinced by his friend Bernie and his friend Long John to end their relationship because they perceived how Elton was not marrying Linda because he loved her, but because of the conventions of that time when people were expected to marry. As you guys, I'm sure, know, Elton John is very clearly and openly a gay person. He is now currently married to David Furnish, who is a Canadian, not American, a Canadian film director. But Elton John was born, obviously, during many moments where people were not allowed to be openly gay, openly homosexual. And that's something that he struggled with when he was younger. And he has been fighting for the rights of people who are homosexual until today. And it's interesting that he also supported very much the cause of AIDS and HIV awareness, something that brought him closer to Princess Diana, who also wanted to build awareness of this problem in society of HIV and AIDS. And it's interesting, when I was talking to my husband about the fact that I was going to talk about Elton and how much he worked as somebody to bring awareness for AIDS and HIV. Antonio, my husband, mentioned that when he was younger, AIDS and HIV was something that people thought that everybody was going to die of, that you could catch from everybody anywhere, a bit like we had with COVID. And there was a lot of panic, a lot of worry, and actually the awareness and bringing people to the understanding of HIV and AIDS and the impact it had on society, something that Elton really worked towards, because he grew up in that time too. He grew up seeing the impact of that, especially in the homosexual community. So this is his partner nowadays. Here we have Elton. He's a bit younger in this picture. He's much older now. But here we have David Furnish and Elton John. They have 2 children who were born through surrogacy, Zachary and Elijah. And he works very much nowadays, not just for his music, Elton, but also through his charity work and something that was recognized by the royal family. Elton John has the title Sir Elton John. Sir Elton John, as the Sir is by recognition through the royal family of his work in charities such as the AIDS and HIV community. And he also is very much part of the charities that communicate about, almost spoke Portuguese, about drugs and alcohol abuse, something that he, as I said, went through. He actually stopped having this, stopped being addicted to alcohol and, well, not stopped being addicted. He was treated for his addiction for alcohol and drugs in the 1990s. He went to rehab and then he, as we say in English, became clean. And since then, he has not had a problem with drugs and alcohol since. But it took a very long time for him to manage to control this addiction that he had for many years because of his fame and fortune. And so if you listen again to those songs I spoke about yesterday, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, this idea of saying goodbye, of moving away from fame, moving away from the fortune, moving away from all the media and the attention, that was something that you can see a lot in Elton's songs. If you listen to his songs and pay attention to the lyrics, you can see many of his songs talk about this idea of finding what is real in life, identifying what's important, making sure that you don't follow the yellow brick road just for fame, just for fortune. So that's an important message through his music. And one of his songs, which I think is one of the most poignant songs that Elton sings, is Someone Saved My Life Tonight. And this was the idea of someone actually saving him through helping him overcome his addictions. So Elton John's life is incredibly interesting. If you haven't watched the film Rocket Man, you guys definitely should. It's a great film. I really enjoyed watching it. I watched it at the cinema when it came out, actually. I actually like these movies about the biography of singers such as the Freddie Mercury movie, the Elvis movie. I think obviously they are interpretation of the events, but it really helps us visualize and see that time, that context of that singer's life, where they came from, etc. Because sometimes it's difficult for somebody. For example, I was born in 86, so I'm 39 years old. I was born after all that time of the 70s or the decade. I hear from my parents about that time. But if you don't watch films that come from that time, that portray that time, it's hard to imagine. So films like that really help you to imagine it. And also, it's really interesting to have this idea of what Elton family life was like, and these people who are important like Bernie, etc. during his life. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's class about Elton John. Lots of people who are new here wondering why I am speaking just in English. So I'm going to finish our live today in a little bit of Portuguese for people to understand why this live is 100% in English. Essa aula é sempre 100% em inglês para vocês praticar. Eu não quero que vocês sentem, meu Deus, eu não entendi nada. A ideia é que você vem para a aula para praticar e tentar compreender uma coisa, para vocês conseguirem praticar seu inglês de uma forma interessante. Eu sempre falo para vocês, essa semana britânica inteira estou falando também sobre a importância de gostar, de aproveitar, de achar coisas interessantes no idioma, não só ficar naquelas regras gramaticais e chorando sobre preposições, mas também aproveitar a jornada. Essa faz parte, claro, mas também o que faz parte é aproveitar e gostar e achar coisas que você gosta, música que você gosta, filmes que você gosta, cultura, literatura, etc. Amanhã tem mais uma aula da Semana Britânica, a última aula da semana. Nós vamos fazer aula culinária. Quem está preparado para cozinhar comigo? Eu estarei fazendo uma receita 10 horas da manhã ao vivo no Instagram. No pressure. Eu já fiz isso outras vezes. Eu não faço receitas complexas porque eu sou bem limitada na cozinha, mas é gostoso, sempre é gostoso. Então, se você gostaria de aproveitar e cozinhar em inglês comigo e aproveitar praticar seu inglês também com uma forma interessante, fazendo uma receita comigo, uma receita tradicional da culinária britânica, vem para a aula amanhã, 10 horas no Instagram. É a última aula da Semana Britânica. E para quem está perguntando para mim sobre a oferta da Semana Britânica, eu estou respondendo as mensagens de todo mundo. Eu sei que eu não consigo responder todo mundo, principalmente porque quando eu estou ao vivo eu não estou respondendo no WhatsApp. Mas se você está preparado para estudar comigo, está perguntando, eu estarei respondendo vocês a oferta da Semana Britânica de comprar um curso e ganhar mais um curso de R$1.380 de bônus. Você consegue fazer isso durante a Semana Britânica. Entre em contato comigo para você conseguir aproveitar dessa oferta que nunca aconteceu antes. Semana Britânica acontece uma vez por ano. Eu faço a Semana Britânica desde o começo da pandemia e esse é a 5ª edição e eu faço ela uma vez por ano. Então essa oferta é só para essa época da Semana Britânica. Aproveita que você compra um curso e ganha o outro. Você estudar comigo e tem acesso vitalício, tá bom, gente? Essa é a oferta que vai estar acontecendo durante essa semana junto comigo. Você pode entrar em contato comigo via WhatsApp ou o Instagram para a gente conversar sobre essa oferta ou clique no link no meu bio aqui no Instagram. Thank you very much, guys, for taking part today. Muito obrigada. Receita para a aula de ontem. As pessoas estão perguntando, estarei nas stories mais tarde hoje. Eu tenho algumas coisas para postar nos stories antes, mas depois eu estarei colocando sobre a receita para vocês prepararem os ingredientes, porque são algumas que talvez você não tenha no seu armário, então eu gosto de postar antes para vocês conseguirem se preparar. So that's the end of our lunchtime listening. I hope you've enjoyed learning about Elton John. Go and listen to one of his songs now to finish your Friday, and I will see you tomorrow for one more class of Semana Britânica. Thank you guys. See you all very soon. Take care now.